Alrighty, guys, welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show. And if you're just joining us for the very first time, this is the number one place where we unpack real stories behind people that are solving problems that you didn't even think or realize you had until now. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and this episode is going to be for anyone who's maybe ever made a mistake and then felt that that one moment was going to define their entire life. But that's not always the case, because today we're going to be diving into something that most people don't normally talk about, and it's what happens after a bad decision and how you actually rebuild from it without any of the shame and stigma that comes along with it. So make sure you hit subscribe on whatever platform that you're going to be watching or listening to this on, because in every episode we have designed it so that it gives you insights, stories, and solutions that actually shift how you see your business and your life. Now, today's guest is someone who actually went from engineering Black Hawk helicopters in the Royal Australian Air Force to stepping into one of the most misunderstood industries in Australia, which is the alcohol interlock space. And here is the big twist that you might be thinking. He actually didn't do it for profit. No. He did it because of a personal tragedy that actually changed everything. Now, Ron, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. I don't know if this is the right time or the right space for us to say thank you so much for your service.
Always happy to oblige, as we say.
Absolutely. But I've got to ask, Ron, I mean, you went from working on Black Hawk helicopters, which I think are a marvel in technology in and of themselves. And these machines are designed to keep people alive in high risk situations. And now you're working on devices that actually stop people from starting their cars after a few drinks. Did that just swap, one type of don't let people crash system from, one high level position to another?
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at somebody's journey, how they end up where they are. My journey is particularly quite colourful, you might say. Yeah, I was in the Air Force. I was working on Black Hawks. I went overseas, did some training with the US Army, the US Navy, and because of that, I came back to Australia, still in the Air Force doing Black Hawks. And we had this, the training I did over in the US was particular to rotor track and balance, like balancing of the Black Hawk blades and whatnot. And because we were introducing Black Hawk into Australia, we hadn't got all the equipment that we actually needed, or the expertise. So that's why I was training in the US. So when I came back to Australia, ANSET, one of their engineering divisions, rang me up the first day of every month, wanting me to come across to them because they were the agents here in Australia and they didn't know too much about the equipment. So every month they offered me a bigger pay package. So I was actually at the same time applying for a commission. So I was a sergeant in the Air Force and I applied for a commission. And the funniest thing happened, as we always say, the funniest thing happened on the way to work. My friend, who was also a sergeant, actually he was a flight sergeant, we were driving to work together and he had to pull in to his father-in-law's factory. And his father-in-law wasn't the best at speaking English, yet he was running a multi-million dollar business. And after I got back in the car, I said to my friend Norm, I said, you know what? If your father-in-law, who can't speak the best of English, can build a multi-squillion dollar business, then I've got half a chance because I can speak English. So with that, I joined ANSET, and believe it or not, after 6 months of being with ANSET Technologies, that's the branch of ANSET, which was an airline here in Australia. They actually sacked me. To my horror, they actually said, we don't have a job for you here anymore because we can't see what you do. Of course, what I did was I computerized everything in the first 6 months. I made it look so simple that they thought I wasn't doing anything. So that led them to sacking me, which was one of those sliding door moments. So I rang the company in the US who we represented at Ansett, and I said, can I be your rep in Australia? And they said, yeah, okay. Only to find out 10 years later, the reason they gave me the representation in Australia is because I was the biggest pain in their butt for the 6 months I was actually at Ansett because I asked so many questions, which they hadn't asked for the last 10 years that they were the reps. Anyway, long story short, I tenfolded the business first year and same second year. And I was rep of the year for many, many, many years. Anyway, that equipment needed to be calibrated. So I found a calibration laboratory that was really good. And Shane, who owned that, I said to him, let's merge our businesses and we'll make the calibration business the biggest business in Australia, which we did. So it took about 4 to 5 years to do that. We kept it for about 10 years. And then we were bought out by a huge company. That in itself was very, very interesting. Then that particular company asked me to go to New Zealand to fix a few business issues that they had there. And this is the point that I'm getting at, your viewers, opportunity comes in various forms and they might not present themselves right at that very second. So what happened there is I needed somebody to take my place as the general manager of my old business. So I rang a friend of mine. I said, hey, what are you doing? And he said, nothing. I said, great, send me a resume and I'll make sure you get this job. So long story short, he became the general manager of my old business. I went to New Zealand, sorted out the issue fairly quickly within 3 to 4 months. Came back to Australia, and the company I sold was getting a bad reputation, and I didn't want to be attached to that. So I said farewell to them. And I then started mentoring, people, CEOs and managers and just friends, and started messing about doing that. So what happened after that, if we fast forward without getting into a lot of detail, that particular individual rang me up after about 8 years. He had since left my old company that I owned and was doing mergers and acquisitions. So he rang me up about 8 years later and he said, what are you doing? Exactly the question I had asked him. And I said, just helping people. He says, I might have a business that you may be interested in. And I said, what's that? And he said, alcohol interlocks. And I said, what's that? And of course he laughed because he knew all about it. And I had never, ever heard anything about the alcohol interlock business. Now, let me just pause on that for a minute because it's quite crucial to understand why I said yes after he asked me. My daughter, who was in her late 30s, and hopefully I'll just keep it together here, she was out one night with her boyfriend. And, tragic circumstances, they were drinking when they shouldn't have been drinking. And then they were driving when they shouldn't have been driving. And long story short, there was, I had a knock on the door at about 1:30 in the morning. And I knew straight away that what had happened, it was the police. And my daughter passed away in an accident because of drink driving. So when I was asked to have a look at this business, it was very, very close to my heart. If I could prevent that happening to other people, then that would be a worthy cause. So I dived into the interlock business, not knowing a thing about it. As it should happen to be, my partner and I were traveling the US and we diverted to Canada, met with a company, spoke to the CEO and all the folks there, and decided that they were a great company to work with. So we came back to Australia and started the Interlock program from scratch, I might add. And that's creating all the systems, doing everything that you could possibly think of for a startup business. It was a pretty wild process. We also had to win tenders, which was okay because our unit is a really good unit and it's certified to all these particular standards. So winning the tenders wasn't a real issue. And when I say winning the tenders, there's like 4 of us in Australia that actually provide this service. And each one is different how they actually work. I just think that ours is the easiest one there. We just have to blow into our device. And if you haven't been drinking, you can simply start the car and you're on your merry way. So we came back and started that. And it's been growing ever since. Now, I know we had a discussion earlier on about, who has an interlock? Well, you know what? You wouldn't believe it. I would probably gather when people talk about interlocks, they have all these preconceived ideas of the type of person that has an interlock. Well, I'm here to tell you that those preconceived ideas might be 3% of the whole population. We have doctors, lawyers, nurses, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, all sorts of people with an interlock because, yep, they may have been drinking, but they may have been drinking for a reason. Everybody knows you shouldn't be drink driving, but I can tell you, when my daughter passed away, not that I ever drink drove, but I certainly had my fair share of alcohol to numb the pain. It's not pleasant, and I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. So now I look at this business, the more people that are on the interlock, the safer your kids are, the safer you are, the safer the community at large are. So that's why I do this, to make a difference.
Thank you so much, Ron, for taking us through that, and also obviously turning your tragedy into a solution for most people and families out there. But I wanted to take us back a little bit, marrying where you are now and, the past and the things that you've probably done. I don't know, I've learned and I've been watching a lot of the Navy SEALs sort of types of training and, the way that they're conditioned for when events like this sort of happen. Now, obviously, you did not, get involved in any war while you were, commissioned, were you?
Actually, I was in the peacekeeping force in 1982 in the Sinai. Whilst it wasn't a direct conflict, we were always on alert, if you like. And before we left to go to the Sinai, believe it or not, we did gas chamber exercises. It's not a lot of fun having mustard gas on your face and down your neck. We also did a lot of pistol shooting and a lot of rifle shooting, just in case. So whilst there wasn't any action there, I can tell you that we were shot at a couple of times. Luckily, they missed because that's the environment that was over there at the time. And in fact, it's still happening, as you see on the news.
Yeah.
So we had that training. Also, I was lucky enough to do a combat survival course, which is, one of those courses that pilots usually do, but I volunteered for it because I used to like doing a lot of flying. And the combat survival course, I can tell you now, is really, really tough, and it's very interesting. It certainly molds you into a different type of person, especially when you realize, the things that can go pear-shaped when you're flying around. And if you go down in a helicopter, then you need to be able to sustain, look after yourself and be there. So when the rescue folks come, you're okay.
Absolutely. And with all these high adrenaline intensive training and pretty much preparing you for the worst case scenario, I don't think nothing would have prepared you for that 1:30 call from the police.
It's a father's worst nightmare. There is no preparation on the planet that can prepare you for the death of your child. It just shouldn't happen. Parents, yeah, my father passed away, my mother's passed away, but when your child passes away, it's just a whole new ball game, and there is nothing that can prepare you for that. And you just live that moment day after day after day for years on end. And the only thing that gets you through is the acceptance that it has happened. What is the reason that it's happened? Who knows? As I say, time heals everything. You never forget. And one of the things that used to really, really upset me is, even now, if I see a movie where the father's giving the daughter away for a wedding, because my daughter Ashley was going to get married, then I kind of lose it. And I just have to sit in that for like half an hour or so.
Thank you so much for walking us through this, because half of the time, Ron, a lot of people would have taken themselves away from an industry that keeps rubbing salt on a wound that already is there. What is it exactly that's actually making you lean into this more and more? Because every time you are going to have to explain or talk about your product, something about Ashley would come into surface.
Yeah. Particularly when I speak to young ones, when I talk to them, when I visit the service centres and those young ones are there, I always ask them, how did they end up on it? And usually stupid mistake. We all learn from those things. In the old 40 years ago, you used to drink and drive and nobody thought too much of it because the internet wasn't around then. Statistics weren't readily available because of the internet. There wasn't YouTube, Facebook and all the rest of it. And the TV wasn't exactly up to speed then. So when I talk to the young ones and the parents, for that matter of fact, when young ones need them. When the parents ring on their behalf, it's such a great thing to do. In fact, what I'm endeavoring to do, which is not as yet happened because I'm still in the infancy of it. The programs that we have at the moment are mandated programs. So that means that they're court ordered. So if you get caught drink driving, you go to court, you lose your license for a particular period of time, and then you have to have an interlock for a particular period of time, and then you're reissued with a full license. What I'd like to create is a volunteer program for kids. So I'm kind of working away in the background, trying to get sponsors for this, trying to reduce the cost for it. So parents all over Australia can get an interlock fitted on a voluntary basis so they know that their kids are safe. If this was available when my daughter was driving, it just wouldn't have happened. And I can only think, we just can't go back in time, but if this voluntary device was fitted to her vehicle, then she would be here today. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So I'm driven to make the mandated program very successful and not look down on people because they have it. I look at it as an opportunity to save other people from those that may not be able to control what they're doing because of circumstance. And I tell you, I've seen some horrible circumstances why people drink. And we can give all the stories about why they shouldn't. The fact is that it's easier to drown your sorrows in a bottle than it is to sit with somebody and admit what's going on, or to face the real world of what's going on. I can tell you now, personally, when this happened, and I haven't actually shared this with a lot of people, but when this happened, I can't remember if it was a week or a month after it happened, I actually couldn't get out of bed. I would stand up and I got out of bed and I'd go dizzy and I couldn't move. I literally couldn't move. And I'm not like that. I'm like, oh, I'm out of bed early. I exercise every day of the week. I've always exercised. And this particular period in my life, I just could not get out of bed and I couldn't fathom why that was happening. My son came and visited. He couldn't even get me out of bed. I could make it from the bed to the lounge, and that was it. But most of the time, I just couldn't get up. And then a very good friend of mine, this went on for about 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even 4 weeks. I was talking to a very, very good friend of mine, and he said one thing to me, one sentence. And he said, "You haven't accepted it yet." And with that statement, my brain went, wow, you are so right. I'm dwelling on it and I haven't accepted it. And I have to tell you, it was almost like a miracle. Within an hour, I got out of bed, had a shower, got dressed, started doing things that I used to do. And it's about the acceptance. And again, if I come back to interlocks, if I can get the voluntary interlock off the ground, because I need sponsors for that, even the mandated programs, I just don't wish what happened to me upon anyone. So, that's how it is.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for opening us up to that, because what you're talking about are the stages of grief. You go through obviously shock, then denial, then anger, then you start bargaining, and then the depression kicks in, then the acceptance then comes in at that particular time. Now, what this sort of creates is it opens us up to a nice loop here, because so many people might not realize that they're in that particular scenario, and they might be resting on a bottle for numbing that pain. Now, there's obviously a huge stigma from what you're saying around people that end up using interlocks, and that sort of misnomer there. What's the biggest misconception that people have about the people that end up blowing into their car to start, so to speak?
I'm going to be real frank here. Most people think that people on interlocks, because I know for a fact that a lot of people don't even know what an interlock is. When I go to reviews and all that, everyone, when they say, "What do you do?" we have to use the word breathalyzer. We install breathalyzer, and they're like, "Well, what's that?" So to answer your question, most people think interlock users are drug addicts, alcoholics, losers. All the negativity that you could possibly conjure up is what people think interlock participants, and they couldn't be further from the truth. Maybe 1% are like that. They have, and we have a lot of people that have psychological issues for whatever reason. It could be they lost their mother, father. They might be broke, or don't have a house, or any number of those things. So they're probably, let's say 1 to 3%. But the rest of them are normal people. Could be your next door neighbor, could be the neighbor across the road. It could be your brother, uncle, auntie. And they're not going to tell you that they had an interlock, because some people are ashamed of it. And I kind of get that. But at the end of the day, as I say to everybody, the more interlocks that are on the road, the safer you and I are. And as far as parents and kids go, the safer they are as well.
Absolutely. And like you say, it could be your doctor, your lawyer, or somebody who's just around you and you wouldn't know up until you've probably walked past them. And then the stigma and obviously the shame that comes along with that as well might make
We
it difficult for people to sort of accept that. Now, there's something about alcohol and its consequences that really is one of those conditions that so many people point a finger at you instead of empathizing or
Mm,
look at you as a second class citizen,
mm,
and they're not actually listening or trying to figure out what's actually happening behind the scenes. You could be somebody
mm.
like yourself who's just gotten that 130 call, or with the way situations are happening, people are highly leveraged and they don't even know how to actually make ends meet, and they will turn to maybe a bottle or whatever it is. And a lot of people might say, well, it's their fault, they made a bad decision. But why should people actually empathize? Because I really want that the acceptance of this volunteer, you know um interlocks be widely accepted instead of being looked at as, like you said, being stigmatized.
Yeah. Let me give you one case, and I'm sure everybody can relate to this. We have a lot of nurses on this. Now, we know that the medical industry is short-staffed, and I've been in hospital a few times for various reasons, broken limbs and whatnot. The nurses are just wonderful, and I've got to take my hat off to them. In fact, I hope that all your listeners, when they go to hospital, the first thing they should say to a nurse is, "Thank you for your service." I
Mm.
say that all the time, and I sincerely mean it. And they also need to be paid twice as much, because they're looking after you under the most stressful conditions that you could possibly think of. They do long hours because there's not enough of them. They take on everybody's issues. Like, if you think a nurse just goes boop blank, forget it. They will sit with you, they'll talk to you, and then of course you're going to go blah, and they're going to sympathize with you. And 99% of them will kind of take that on board on a subconscious level. And because of the stress and because of what they see and what they do, they go home and have a glass of wine. And then it turns into 2 glasses of wine. And then it turns into 3 glasses. And the next minute, they wake up. And this is some of the fallacies that people think, oh, if I go to bed, then when I wake up, I'll be okay. Well, guess what? You still have alcohol in your system. So you have to be very careful that the following morning after a big night, that you should have a personal device and test to see if you're over the limit. So if I just take that one profession to answer your question, they're very stressful. And there's a number of ways to cope with stress. And of course, alcohol is the easiest. Like, you could go and do exercising, but that would require a different mindset. You'd have to, get out of your comfort zone and go run, 5 kilometers, or go to the gym or swim or whatever. But hey, it's much easier to open the fridge and pull out a bottle of wine or beer or whatever it happens to be. So, and there are a number of people under stress. Teachers, for example, we have a great deal of teachers as well. They're, as you see on the TV, they're abused by students. They get things thrown at them. They get called all these different names. And also, the flip side of that is, when they report something like that, nothing happens. Nothing happens. You also get burgled into, because we've seen that that's happening in Queensland, in Victoria, New South Wales, all over the place. So anybody that's been burgled into will immediately have to deal with that, and there are mechanisms to deal with that. And again, alcohol is the easiest one to, grab that bottle and soothe the pain, but it's only short term lived. One has to accept what's going on, and then make a change.
Mm. And what I'm hearing there is you're saying no matter what happens, these people take their work with them, and it's that they're trying to empathize with whoever their patient is and whatever it is that they're dealing with. And I also just wanted to highlight this to the viewer or the listener right now. You might watch certain things on TV and maybe somebody's punched in the face, you actually flinch and you feel that pain. That's a human response. Whereas you can imagine these people are seeing humans at their worst every single day, and you can imagine they're taking that back to them, and the only way they could deal with that is obviously find ways to numb that pain so they don't get to feel it themselves there. So, and
Mm.
yeah, I do understand exactly what you're putting across there. But talking about work, you're talking about nurses taking their work with them. You were in the army.
Air Force, yep.
As I mean, you were in sorry, you were in the Air Force, and military sort of career there. Has that has that left you, or have you become a citizen, like a civilian yourself, or you still have that military precision with you in everything that you're going through?
That's a great question. I joined the Air Force on a dare, believe it or not.
Mm.
Um, my school friend and I, who lived around the corner, we were in year 10, and it was time to, think about getting a job. And in those days, you didn't think too much about uni because it just wasn't, just wasn't a thing. So we were actually reading the newspaper one day, and there was a big ad for the Air Force in there. And then we're like, "Oh, I dare you to fill it out." "No, I dare you to." "Okay, let's do it together." So we so we both joined the Air Force at the same time, and I got to tell you, I was the third eldest in the intake. I was 16, 9 months and 3 days when I joined,
Wow.
and I joined as an apprentice. And I already had a job. I'd been working in garages and also buying and selling cars when I was 16, and doing all sorts of things to make cash. And when I joined the Air Force, I was going to get out every day because it was so disciplined. And if you didn't do the right thing, it's old school ways. They'd take you around the back and give you a bashing, basically, which is fine. And they should do that today. So I was going to quit every single day. I ended up doing 12 years. And I've got to tell you that the discipline never leaves you. Like if you looked into my cupboard or my T-shirts, they're all facing one particular way, and all the colours are arranged. All my shoes are like spot on. All my watches sit there, and some might think that's a bit, over the top, but it works. And also the discipline in dealing with people, the discipline about getting up, the discipline about doing things. I don't look at a clock when I'm at work. I just do what needs to be done. And that's how it is in the military. You just get on with it and do what you need to do. I might just say that's what it was like when I was in the military. Now that they've got all this woke stuff going on, who knows what's going on? But when I left the military after 12 years, the business I was in was with Air Force helicopters and fixed wing aircraft. So I was very much still with the Air Force as a civilian, selling stuff and training the Navy, Army, and Air Force in how to balance propellers. In fact, I trained overseas militaries: India, Air Force, Navy, and Army, Pakistan. I've been to China, Hong Kong, Middle East, Turkey, Fiji, New Guinea, New Zealand Air Force. There's a whole bunch of them. I probably forgot half of them. So all that discipline was great. In fact, if I had my way, I'd bring back national service, and you either went to uni, got an apprenticeship, or you joined the military. And I would definitely, all the youngsters that are before the court, you get, caught stealing and all that sort of thing. For me, it's no question, you're going in the military. So instead of paying a prison warden to look after you, those funds are better employed by giving them to the military, because it won't cost nowhere near as it would to keep somebody in jail. And I can tell you right now, after 12 months, they'd come out a totally different person.
Because it actually, yeah, I like what you're talking about, the discipline and also the precision of, looking
Mm.
after yourself and just the grooming and everything else. I'm sorry if my background is giving you PTSD right there, because, which you
Yeah.
never really got while you were in the army. But why I drove towards this question is, how has this Air Force background now shaped the way that you're running AIS?
Oh, yeah, that's another great question. Because what we do in business, especially as a business owner, you have to think about strategy. You have to think about people. How you treat people, how you talk to them. It's all about processes, and it's about integrity, and it's about doing it right. So the military teaches you critical thinking. It also teaches you logical thinking, and it also teaches you problem solving. And probably the biggest skill, if you do the right training in the Air Force, is you learn people skills, and that by far is one of the benefits of being in the military. You just get stuff done, and you get it done the proper way, the organized way.
Absolutely. Now, there's something that I've always wanted to know, especially when somebody was in the army, and you guys are literally trained to be a weapon in and of yourself. And when you then transition to, to be a civilian, you've got to have to mellow down a great deal. But your motto is, if it's not right for the customer, it's not right for the company. And it literally just takes that whole concept to be people first and really understand the needs and the wants of the person that's in front of you. Now, where does that come from, and how does that maybe show up in your day-to-day operations at AIS?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And you can boil that down to one word: integrity.
Mm,
Um, how would you feel if somebody didn't do the right thing by you, or they messed you around? For example, our process here is really simple. You go to the website, you fill in the quote form, you get a quote, everything's listed. We actually stand by our quote, so we don't hide anything. That's probably a better word. We don't hide anything. And when you decide to accept our quote, we send you a form that you enroll into the program, and we take care of everything after that. So we make sure that every step is catered for with the least possible grief or interference or stress. So I always look at business: how would I like to be treated? How would I like the process to go? And the military gives you kind of that thinking and awareness. That's not to say everybody takes advantage of it, but those that do, you know, I can tell you loads of military people that run very, very successful businesses, and it's all because they were in the military. Because I, I've never probably said this to anybody, but we're different. We make stuff happen.
mm,
We're disciplined. We make stuff happen, and we see it differently. For example, in the military, it's every youngster's dream to travel around the planet and do things that mere mortals would never do. So I was in a helicopter squadron, and we would do things that I tell you now, mere mortals would never, ever, ever, ever even think about doing. We
mm.
would used to be on exercise and fly to the highest mountain, land the helicopter on it, and then make a cup of tea and just look out over the mountains. Or when it was foggy, this is in New South Wales towards Canberra, we would fly not too, sorry, very close to a truck roof. So we would be right on top of a truck because it was so foggy we could see where we were going. So we just followed the highway. So, and then we'd have a CB in the aircraft, and we'd go, hey, and we'd talk to the truck that was right underneath, and they'd say, where are you? And we'd go, look out your window. So,
Um,
so yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I'm picturing you with, it's a Black Hawk, right? Aviators and Maverick, and you're just having fun all the way. And I can only imagine that sort of scenario. But from all those high stakes environments and, all the things that you could be doing, like I say, just pitch up at a mountain and just make a cup of tea while everybody else is busy humming and drumming. You've gone into a world where it's driven by paper and it's paperwork after paperwork after paperwork. You must be scratching your eyeballs by now.
Well, here's again where we differ. We do everything online and we make this process so seamless, we actually don't have paper. I made a decision right from the beginning. I looked at how everybody else does things in the market, and regardless of that, I just went, well, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to cut trees down. I don't want to waste paper. I mean, we do print stuff out. Don't get me wrong there. But generally, for the amount of enrollments that we have and the processes that we do, we hardly have any paper whatsoever. We've automated everything. We use AI, we use Salesforce, we use a number of systems, and we're highly systemized. Like, I will never stop making our systems perfect.
Absolutely. And I mean, obviously, with the court system and everything else, it's just, I see lawyers walking around strutting with papers and things like that. I was just thinking maybe you would be knee deep in all of that and,
No.
contemplating the days where tea by the mountainside would have been better. So,
Mm.
I mean, obviously, we've really looked at where this all came from and what you have put together. But when you look at what you're building now, obviously with the
Mm.
stigma that's in the marketplace and how people just treat these sort of devices, what will success actually look like, and what would it look like when you're done with all of this?
Well, we're currently in Queensland, New South Wales, Western Australia. We'll be in Northern Territory within weeks. We have our application into Victoria, and then there's South Australia, which is releasing a tender soon. So what will look like for us when we're in every state and everybody's happy, then I know that I've done everything that needs to be done at AIS. And after that, it's just pretty much on autopilot because of all the systems that we created to make everybody's life easy. I mean, we are the simplest ones to be enrolled with because we understand and we have a lot of empathy for the folks on the end of the phone. That's not to say that there are some people take advantage of it, and we know that, and we make sure that they learn their lesson, and we help them learn that lesson the nice way, and also the firm way.
Absolutely. And if people are interested in maybe the programs or finding out how you can be a part of what they're doing, or maybe engage in the voluntary interlock system, how can people get in touch or see what sort of products you've got?
Simply go to our website, affordableinterlocks.com.au, and you can have a look at the website, which, by the way, is undergoing an upgrade. But pretty much go to the website, have a look at the personal program there and the mandated program. With that kids program, if there are any viewers on here that are big corporate that want to sponsor, they will be splashed all over the website, and I can pretty much guarantee that once this takes off, Channel 9 and all the other TV channels will pick this up because this is a real issue for young people. And if parents can sleep at night knowing that there's an interlock in the vehicle, happy days, because I wish I had one.
Mm. And Ron, you know what I'm noticing here? I mean, you just didn't build a business after it's all said and done. Yes, you did. It did come through some mergers and acquisition, friendship that you had in the past and things of that nature. But I feel like what you've built is a bridge because you're literally giving people back to themselves. You know, that bridge is between judgment and actual understanding and, between the punishment that people feel like they're receiving, having to blow into their car to start, but it's actual rehabilitation. And I think that's something that most industries never attempt because those kinds of things can never be measured. So for those that are watching right now, I think what you're doing really, really matters because when somebody gets their independence back by being able to drive and still be able to function and run their lives, they definitely will be undergoing that rehabilitation in a way that only them could understand. So thank you so much. I'll make sure that all those links are in the show notes below and people can actually get on there. But obviously, you might have some stories, Ron, maybe, a moment or maybe a part where somebody went through some of your programs and then they came out on the other side different. Is there something like that you can share with us today?
Yeah, 100%. I was just about to say that when people come to the program, they're embarrassed.
Mm,
They feel like, they're the only ones on the planet that need this. They feel isolated. They feel confused. And we're right out of the gate, we treat them with respect. So much so that when people finish the program, they actually give us a good Google review, but they do more than that. They actually ring up and they thank us for guiding them through the process. And we've had several instances where they've bought chocolate and dropped it off at the office. And I've had so many mothers in particular ring and thank us for guiding them through this delicate time. Um, but I want to finish off with being respectful of the person and not judging them. And that way it gives them their respect back and they feel good about that. And they know it's just a process and it's just time. And when they get to the end of it, they appreciate the time that they have had. In fact, we have I wouldn't say a lot, but we have people that go, you know what, this process has been great. I wouldn't mind keeping this interlock in my vehicle because I've got kids, et cetera, and this would stop them as well. So we get that sort of thing as well.
absolutely. And for those that are watching right now, if you've ever, and I know we do this, you know what I mean? We judge a book by its cover. Oh, he's a bit snappy today, or, just get over yourself and things like that. If you ever judged anyone only to realize later that you don't quite know their full story, I want you to drop the word interlock in the comments. And if this conversation is actually shifting the way you see things, I will be putting in all the links so that you can connect with Ron and obviously, work with them. Now, Ron, I've been in Australia for 14 years, and in the time, there's an unspoken culture, which I'm going to say this with utmost love and respect. Whenever something is about to happen, grand final or activity, barbecue, or whatever it is, everybody's looking at who's buying a slab, who's buying alcohol, who's providing what. And there's this unspoken culture that every celebration has to have some sort of alcohol component
Mm.
to it. And obviously, this is something that is culturally embedded. And then to do more justice to that as well, there's an unspoken culture where people always just say, she'll be all right, mate. You know what I mean? Like stiffen up, everything else like that, which means so many people are left alone now if they can't drink or if they can't harden up as society expects. What would you say to those people that are actually just doing the right thing and just really trying to maybe get their life back together without them having to, face what society has in store for them with ready-made statements like that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the great questions of the day. Because when I go out to a function, I have water.
All right.
And I've had a number of people go, "Oh, how come you're drinking water?" I said, "Well, what's wrong with that?" why are you drinking alcohol? They're like, huh? I said, what? Why are you drinking alcohol? And they really don't have an answer for that. So what I would say is stand in your shoes, stand tall, and be proud, and go, I don't need to drink. Why do I need to drink? In fact, why are you drinking? One of the things that I want to leave you with is this: the concentration of alcohol in your blood is very hard to measure with all sorts of different people, shapes, sizes, height, width, all the rest of it. I can tell you from personal experience, because I have a personal breathalyzer that is in the car. So when I do drink, like my partner and I went out to the casino, well, this is probably like a year or two ago, and we were there for 5 hours. And I always have a drink, and then I have a water, and then I might have a drink and a water. Anyway, I went back to the car after about 5 hours, and I felt great. Seriously, I felt awesome. But as we always do, we take our personal breathalyzer out, we blew into it, and guess what? I was over. And I went, wow, I don't even feel that. I feel nothing. In fact, I could have jumped in and driven for 12 hours without even falling asleep or doing anything. And I went, wow, that's really amazing. So then I gave it to my partner. She's a smaller build. She blew into it and she was over. She's like, wow, I don't feel a thing. So what's the moral of the story there? You might think you're okay, but chances are you're not. If you have any alcohol at all, don't drink and drive. It's just a stupid thing to do. And if you're on a motorbike, that's even worse. That's a recipe for disaster. So you just never know. And also, here's another thing that we've noticed: after every major event like Easter, Christmas, what public holidays, whatever it happens to be, big football thing, 12 months after that, we get an influx of people to go on the program. So we know when there's been RBTs because we get an influx from a particular area after those events. So January for us is like really busy.
While everybody's trying to nurse the hangovers and Christmas hangovers, you rolling your sleeves and getting to work. Now, I know we're about to conclude this, but we now have also inherited, I don't know from where, but a series of electric bicycles, vehicles, and sort of, you did mention a motorbike, and then I just thought, everybody's on these scooters and things of that nature. What's the goal there? I mean, obviously that's maybe into the future, but have you got anything lined up for those? Because they're equally as dangerous, because if you're going to be going, say, 50 or so on a two-wheeler of sorts, no matter how close you are to the ground, you will be on the ground at some point.
100%. Let's take motorbikes for example, motorcycles. I'm a motorcycle rider, have been for my whole life, basically. So whenever we get a request for a motorcycle, I personally ring that person up and go, I mean, we can fit them. That's not an issue, but it's dangerous because you have to keep your eye on the handset. And then when you have to blow into it, you either have to stop, which means you won't get to very far because you'll have to keep blowing into it, or you've got to take your hand off the handlebars and be totally alert to what's going on. If you've not ridden a bike, a motorcycle, you need eyes on the back of your head and in the side to see what's going on. And it's very, very dangerous. So whilst we can fit it, I personally ring every motorcycle rider and give them the third degree as to why they shouldn't do it. And I advise them to go buy a car because it's safer to have an interlock in a car than it is to have an interlock on a motorcycle.
Absolutely. And with the electric scooters that the kids these days have?
Yeah, electric scooters is a different thing because they're not registered, they're not mandated by the court, they don't have licenses. If I had my way, every scooter that went over the speed limit and every kid that did something stupid, I'd grab the e-bike and I'd squash it. And I'd go, here you go. I'd just put it back to them because
There you
they're
go,
dangerous.
kids. There you go, kids. Don't go around run in your electric bikes. But thank you so much, Ron. I mean, your life story and your experience and what you're doing with this. I mean, you had, the universe or whatever throw rocks at you, but you're now using those rocks to literally build a wall that will help others be do and have a happier existence. So I really commend you for all that you're doing and literally helping others see another day. So thank you so much for your time today. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. What a conversation for those that are watching or listening. This, as you can tell, this wasn't about road safety at all. It was about humanity and survival, really. And literally what actually happens pretty much after a mistake. Yes, like we've mentioned, half of the time we are cornered by friends, relatives, and our peers to have yet another drink and be sociable, but usually that doesn't end well. And obviously it was also about the people that are quietly working behind the scenes and making sure that others actually do get a second chance in life and do life differently. So if this episode made you think or even pause for a second, I encourage you to share this episode with somebody who needs a reminder that, hey, one moment doesn't actually define your lifetime. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the Online Prosperity Show, because in the next episode, we're going to be diving into ideas that will actually help you create a more happier and more fulfilled existence. And it's not just in business, but in life. And I will make sure that all those links that Ron has mentioned are in the show notes below. All right. And I can't wait to see what you're going to be doing with this information. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day and drive safely out there. Bye for now.